In the distant future, Earth was no longer a place of freedom or hope. Towering spires made of dark metal pierced the skies above what was once known as New Chicago. These structures belonged to the Krylos, an alien race that had conquered humanity long ago. The Krylos were massive insect-like creatures with shiny exoskeletons that reflected light like mirrors. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim streets below, watching everything and missing nothing. They ruled through fear, punishing even the smallest acts of disobedience with swift and brutal force. Beneath their shadow, humans lived in crowded slums. Broken buildings leaned against each other, their walls cracked and stained. The air smelled of rust and decay, a constant reminder of how far humanity had fallen. Most people went about their lives quietly, too afraid to speak out or dream of anything better. But not everyone had given up. Daniel Carter worked in a small, hidden workshop deep in the ruins of old Chicago. He was a mechanic who could fix almost anything. From old robots to broken communication devices, his hands moved quickly and confidently over tools scattered across his workbench. Despite the harsh world around him, Daniel always found solace in fixing things. It gave him a sense of purpose, even if only for a little while. Emma, Daniel's younger sister, often visited him at the workshop. She was only 10 years old but full of curiosity and energy. Her bright smile stood out against the grayness of their surroundings. While Daniel worked, Emma would play with scraps of metal or tinker with gadgets she didn't fully understand. Sometimes, she asked questions about the machines he repaired. Other times, she simply sat nearby, humming softly to herself. Daniel loved her more than anything, though he rarely said it out loud. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel decided it was time to head home. "Come on, Emma," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "We need to get back before curfew." Emma nodded eagerly and grabbed a small toy robot she had been playing with earlier. It was shaped like a dog, its joints stiff from years of disuse. "Can we fix this tomorrow?" she asked, holding it up hopefully. "Maybe," Daniel replied with a soft smile, "if you promise to stop taking things apart without asking." As they walked through the narrow alleys, the city grew quieter. The Krylos enforced strict rules after dark, and most humans stayed indoors to avoid trouble. Shadows stretched long across the pavement, cast by flickering streetlights that barely worked. Emma skipped ahead, clutching her toy tightly. Daniel kept a watchful eye on her, scanning the area for any sign of danger. Suddenly, Emma froze. Ahead of them, 3 Krylos soldiers emerged from around a corner. Their armored forms loomed over the narrow alleyway, blocking their path. One of the soldiers clicked sharply, its mandibles twitching as it studied the girl. Emma took a step back, fear etched onto her face. "Stay calm," Daniel whispered, trying to sound reassuring. He reached out to pull her behind him, but it was too late. The lead soldier raised one clawed limb and struck without warning. There was no hesitation, no explanation, just a single, swift motion. Emma crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Time seemed to stop for Daniel. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. Her toy slipped from her hand, clattering uselessly against the pavement. Tears blurred his vision as he shook her gently, calling her name. But there was no response, no breath, no heartbeat. The soldiers turned and walked away as if nothing had happened. To them, Emma was just another human, a meaningless casualty in their endless reign of terror. But to Daniel, she was everything. And as he held her small body in his arms, something inside him shattered. Grief mixed with rage, burning hotter than anything he'd ever felt before. That night, Daniel vowed to make the Krylos pay, not just for Emma, but for every human they had hurt. Little did he know, his journey toward vengeance would spark a revolution that would change the fate of humanity forever. The days following Emma's death were a blur for Daniel. He barely ate or slept, his mind consumed by grief and anger. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, her bright smile replaced by the cold stillness of death. The Krylos had taken everything from him, just as they had taken so much from humanity. But this time, it felt personal. This time, it was his little sister lying lifeless in the dirt. Daniel knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. If he did nothing, Emma's death would become just another forgotten tragedy in a world full of them. He couldn't let that happen. Deep down, he understood that revenge alone wouldn't bring her back, but maybe it could mean something. Maybe it could give others a chance to live without fear. One evening, after hours spent wandering aimlessly through the ruins, Daniel found himself standing outside an old warehouse on the edge of the city. It was a place he'd heard whispers about, a meeting spot for rebels who called themselves the Phoenix. They were fighters, people willing to risk their lives to stand against the Krylos. Daniel didn't know if they could help him, but he had nowhere else to turn. He slipped inside quietly, careful not to draw attention. The space was dimly lit, filled with makeshift tables and chairs. A group of men and women sat huddled together, talking in low voices. At the center of the room stood Rachel Morgan, the leader of the group. She was tall and lean, with sharp features and piercing green eyes. Her dark hair was tied back into a tight braid, and she carried herself with an air of authority. When Rachel noticed Daniel lingering near the doorway, she motioned for him to come closer. "You're new here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What do you want?" Daniel hesitated, unsure where to begin. Then he told her everything. The patrol, Emma's death, the soldiers' casual brutality. As he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion, but he forced himself to keep going. When he finished, there was silence. Rachel studied him carefully, weighing his words. "This isn't the first time they've killed a child," she said finally, "and it won't be the last. But I can see it means something to you. What are you asking for?" "I want to fight," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I need weapons, resources, anything you can give me." Rachel frowned. "We don't have much to spare. And even if we did, striking back at the Krylos is dangerous. One wrong move, and they'll crush us before we even get started." "I don't care," Daniel shot back. "They think they can do whatever they want, to anyone, anytime, and no one will stop them. Well, I'm done letting them win. If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will." For a moment, Rachel said nothing. Then she sighed and turned to the others in the room. "What do you think?" she asked. A man named Alex spoke up first. "He's got guts, I'll give him that. We could use someone like him." Others nodded in agreement. After a brief discussion, Rachel turned back to Daniel. "All right," she said. "But understand this. Once you join us, there's no turning back. You'll be putting your life on the line every single day. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Over the next few days, Rachel introduced Daniel to the inner workings of the Phoenix. They showed him maps of Krylos supply depots, explained how their patrols operated, and taught him basic combat skills. Despite his lack of experience, Daniel proved to be a quick learner. His determination inspired those around him, earning their respect. Meanwhile, news of Emma's death began to spread among the human population. People whispered about the young girl killed for no reason, her story becoming a symbol of the Krylos' cruelty. More and more individuals sought out the Phoenix, eager to join the fight. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the hearts of the oppressed. But hope came with risks. The Krylos weren't blind to the growing unrest. Patrols became more frequent, and curfews were enforced more strictly. Soldiers roamed the streets, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of rebellion. Tension hung thick in the air, like the calm before a storm. Daniel knew the road ahead would be difficult. He also knew that failure wasn't an option. With each passing day, his resolve grew stronger. The memory of Emma's laughter pushed him forward, fueling his desire to make the Krylos pay, not just for her, but for everyone they had hurt. Whatever it took, he was ready to fight. Daniel spent his days training with the Phoenix, learning how to handle weapons and plan attacks. Rachel pushed him hard, testing his limits and teaching him the importance of strategy. Fighting isn't just about anger, she told him one evening as they practiced in an abandoned warehouse. It's about thinking ahead, staying calm under pressure. If you let your emotions control you, you'll get yourself killed. Though Daniel struggled at first, he quickly improved. His hands, once used only for fixing machines, now gripped rifles and knives with surprising skill. He listened carefully to Rachel's instructions, absorbing every detail. At night, he studied maps of Krylos outposts, memorizing patrol routes and supply lines. Each piece of information brought him closer to his goal. One day, Rachel called a meeting with the core members of the Phoenix. She spread a map across a makeshift table and pointed to a location on the outskirts of the city. "This is our target," she said. "A Krylos supply depot. They keep advanced weapons and energy cores there, things we can use to even the odds." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "How do we get in?" "It won't be easy," Rachel admitted. "The place is heavily guarded. But if we time it right, we can slip past their patrols and grab what we need. We'll divide into teams, one to distract the guards, another to infiltrate the depot, and a third to cover our escape." The group nodded, already planning their roles. Daniel volunteered to lead the infiltration team. "I want to be the one who gets inside," he said firmly. "This is my fight." Rachel hesitated but eventually agreed. "All right, but don't take unnecessary risks. Stick to the plan." As the days passed, the rebels prepared for the raid. Weapons were checked, gear was packed, and strategies were rehearsed until everyone knew their part by heart. Tension filled the air, a mix of excitement and fear. For many, this would be their first real attack against the Krylos. Failure wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. On the night of the raid, the team gathered in the shadows near the depot. The building loomed ahead, its walls lined with glowing sensors and armed guards. Daniel adjusted the strap of his rifle, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. Beside him, Alex gave him a reassuring nod. "We've got this," he whispered. The distraction team moved first, setting off small explosions near the perimeter fence. The noise drew the attention of the guards, who rushed toward the commotion. Seizing the opportunity, Daniel led his team through the gap in the defenses. They moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the main entrance. Inside, the depot was a maze of crates and machinery. Daniel signaled for his team to split up, each member heading toward a different section. He found himself in a room stacked high with energy cores, their blue glow lighting up the space. Grabbing a bag, he began stuffing the cores inside, careful not to damage them. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. A Krylos soldier appeared in the doorway, its glowing eyes scanning the room. Before it could react, Daniel raised his weapon and fired. The blast struck the creature's chest, sending it crashing to the floor. "Move," Daniel shouted to his team. They'd regrouped near the exit, bags filled with stolen supplies. Outside, the cover team provided support, firing at any Krylos soldiers who tried to stop them. The retreat was chaotic, with alarms blaring and gunfire lighting up the night. Despite the chaos, the mission was a success. The rebels escaped with crates of weapons and energy cores, retreating into the ruins of old Chicago. Back at their hideout, the team celebrated their victory, though Daniel remained quiet. As he stared at the stolen supplies, he felt a flicker of satisfaction, but also a deeper sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. The success of the raid on the Krylos supply depot gave the Phoenix a much-needed boost. For the first time in years, the rebels had access to advanced weapons and energy cores that could level the playing field against their oppressors. Morale soared as word of the victory spread through the underground network. People who had once been too afraid to act now stepped forward, eager to join the fight. Daniel watched as new faces filled their hideout, each one bringing fresh determination. But with success came danger. The Krylos weren't blind to what had happened. Within days, patrols increased across the city, and curfews became even stricter. Soldiers combed through neighborhoods, searching for anyone connected to the raid. Posters with warnings about rebellion appeared on every street corner, accompanied by images of captured humans being executed. Fear hung heavy in the air, but it no longer paralyzed people. Instead, it fueled their anger. Rachel called another meeting to discuss their next move. "We hit them hard," she said, pacing back and forth in the dimly lit room. "But they're not going to sit back and let us win. They'll come after us harder than ever." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we hit them again before they can regroup." Rachel studied him for a moment before speaking. "There's something else you need to know." She pulled out an old book bound in cracked leather. Its pages were yellowed with age, some edges burned or torn. This was found in the archives decades ago. It talks about a prophecy, an ancient prediction tied to the downfall of the Krylos. She flipped open the book and read aloud, "When innocence bleeds, vengeance shall rise. From the ashes of despair, humanity will reclaim its place among the stars." The words sent a chill through the room. Daniel frowned, leaning forward. "What does it mean?" "It means your sister's death wasn't random," Rachel said softly. "It might have been the spark we've been waiting for, the catalyst that turns fear into action." At first, Daniel struggled to believe her. Prophecies sounded like stories told to comfort the desperate. But as he thought about Emma, about how her loss had ignited something inside him, he began to see the connection. Maybe there was truth in the old words. Maybe Emma's life and death had meaning beyond what he could understand. With renewed purpose, the Phoenix planned their next attack. This time, they targeted smaller Krylos outposts scattered throughout the region. The goal was simple: weaken their grip piece by piece until they were vulnerable enough to strike at their core. Each mission was risky, but the rebels grew bolder with every victory. During one such operation, tragedy struck. Liam Harper, a member of Daniel's infiltration team, was captured during a retreat. The Krylos broadcast his execution live across the city, using it as a warning to others. His face appeared on massive screens mounted above the streets, his final moments replayed over and over. The message was clear: resist, and this will be your fate. The sight enraged Daniel, but it also made him more determined than ever. He refused to let Liam's sacrifice be in vain. That night, he stood before the group, his voice steady despite the weight of everything they'd lost. "They think they can scare us into submission," he said, "but every time they kill one of us, 10 more rise up to take their place. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for everyone who's suffered under their rule." His words resonated deeply with the rebels. More people joined their cause, swelling their ranks. Even those who couldn't fight offered support in other ways, providing food, shelter, or intelligence. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. As the weeks passed, Daniel became a symbol of hope for the oppressed. Whispers of the Avenger began to circulate, spreading stories of a man driven by loss to stand against the Krylos. Though Daniel hated the title, he understood its power. It reminded people that even in the darkest times, someone was willing to fight for them. One evening, as he sat alone in the workshop where he used to tinker with machines, Daniel stared at the toy robot Emma had been holding the night she died. He picked it up, running his fingers over its rusted surface. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. For the first time since her death, he allowed himself to grieve fully. "I won't stop," he whispered to the empty room. "Not until they pay for what they've done." Outside, the city remained dark and quiet, but somewhere beneath the shadows, a fire was growing, one that would soon burn brighter than anyone imagined. The prophecy Rachel had shared weighed heavily on Daniel's mind. At first, he dismissed it as an old story meant to inspire hope in desperate times. But the more he thought about it, the more it began to make sense. Emma's death had sparked something, a chain reaction that was spreading faster than anyone expected. Her innocence had bled, just as the prophecy said, and now vengeance was rising in its place. Rachel noticed the change in him. One evening, after a long day of planning their next attack, she approached him as he sat alone in the corner of their hideout. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked gently. Daniel looked up, startled. "About what?" "The prophecy," she said, sitting beside him. "I can see it in your eyes." He hesitated before nodding. "It's hard not to think about it. Every time we strike back at the Krylos, I feel like we're proving it true. Like Emma's death wasn't meaningless." "It wasn't," Rachel said firmly. "Her memory is keeping us going. That little girl gave us something to fight for when most of us had nothing left." Daniel clenched his fists, his emotions swirling. He wanted to believe her, but guilt still gnawed at him. If only he'd been faster that night. If only he'd reached Emma in time. Maybe things would be different. Maybe she'd still be alive. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't change the past, Daniel, but you can honor her by finishing what she started. By making sure no one else suffers the way she did." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time since Emma's death, Daniel felt a glimmer of peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acceptance. He couldn't bring her back, but he could ensure her sacrifice wasn't wasted. Over the following days, the Phoenix launched a series of coordinated attacks across the region. Using the stolen weapons and energy cores from the supply depot, they struck at Krylos outposts with precision and force. Each victory emboldened the rebels, drawing more people to their cause. News of their successes spread quickly, carried by word of mouth and whispered conversations in hidden corners of the city. But the Krylos weren't idle. They responded with brutal crackdowns, increasing patrols and executing anyone suspected of aiding the rebellion. Posters warning against resistance covered every wall, and soldiers roamed the streets with deadly intent. Despite this, fear no longer controlled the population. Instead, anger burned brighter than ever. One night, during a raid on a Krylos communications tower, Daniel came face to face with General Vrax, the commander responsible for ordering Emma's execution. The massive insectoid creature stood taller than any other Krylos soldier, its exoskeleton gleaming under the moonlight. Its glowing eyes locked onto Daniel, filled with cold indifference. "You humans never learn," Vrax hissed, raising a clawed limb. "Your defiance will only lead to more suffering." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle, his heart pounding. He wanted nothing more than to pull the trigger right then and there, but he forced himself to stay calm. Rachel's voice echoed in his mind. Asterisk fighting isn't just about anger. It's about strategy. Asterisk killing Vrax now wouldn't help. It would only alert the rest of the Krylos forces nearby. Instead, Daniel fired a shot at the ground near Vrax's feet, creating a distraction. As the general flinched, Daniel signaled for his team to retreat. They disappeared into the shadows, leaving the Krylos soldiers confused and frustrated. Back at the hideout, the rebels celebrated another successful mission. But Daniel remained quiet, staring at the weapon in his hands. He knew the encounter with Vrax wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Sooner or later, they would meet again. That night, as he lay awake in the darkness, Daniel made a silent promise to Emma. No matter how long it took, no matter how many battles they had to fight, he would find Vrax and make him pay for what he'd done. And when that day came, the prophecy would come full circle. Vengeance would rise, just as it was foretold. The rebellion continued to grow stronger with each passing day. More humans joined the Phoenix, inspired by the stories of their victories against the Krylos. Factories once abandoned were repurposed into makeshift armories, where stolen weapons were repaired and upgraded. Safe houses popped up in hidden corners of the city, offering shelter to those fleeing Krylos oppression. For the first time in years, hope spread like wildfire, lighting up even the darkest parts of New Chicago. But not everyone could be trusted. One evening, as Daniel reviewed plans for an upcoming raid with Rachel and a small group of rebels, Sarah Bennett entered the room. She was quiet and kept mostly to herself, but she had proven useful in gathering intelligence on Krylos movements. Still, something about her demeanor made Daniel uneasy. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he decided to keep an eye on her. A few days later, disaster struck. During a mission to sabotage a Krylos power grid, half of the Phoenix's leadership team was ambushed and captured. The survivors barely escaped with their lives, retreating to the safety of their hideout. Everyone was shaken, but none more so than Rachel, who had lost some of her closest allies. How did they know we were coming? Alex demanded during a heated meeting later that night. We planned this in secret. No one outside this room should have known. Daniel frowned, suspicion growing in his chest. His eyes drifted to Sarah, who sat silently in the corner, avoiding everyone's gaze. Did anyone talk to outsiders recently? He asked, his voice sharp. Rachel stood up, her expression grim. I think I know who might be responsible. She turned to Sarah. Sarah, can you explain why Krylos soldiers showed up at your brother's house yesterday? Why they let him and his family leave unharmed? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Sarah, whose face paled under the weight of Rachel's accusation. I didn't have a choice, she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. They threatened my family. They said if I didn't help them, they'd kill everyone I love. Anger rippled through the group. Some shouted demands for justice, while others argued over what to do next. Daniel clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. Betrayal cut deep, especially when trust was already so fragile. Enough. Rachel barked, silencing the room. She walked over to Sarah, her green eyes blazing. You betrayed us. Because of you, good people are dead or captured. How could you do this? I'm sorry, Sarah cried, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted my family to be safe. Rachel stared at her for a long moment before speaking. If we're going to survive this, we need to use every advantage we have, including you. You're going to feed the Krylos false information. Make them believe our next attack is somewhere else. If you refuse, you'll answer to all of us. Sarah nodded quickly, fear etched onto her face. I'll do whatever you ask. Just please don't hurt my family. Despite the tension, Rachel agreed to give Sarah another chance. But trust was gone, replaced by wary caution. From that point on, Sarah was watched closely, her every move scrutinized. In the days that followed, the Phoenix prepared for their most ambitious operation yet, a direct assault on the Krylos stronghold in New Chicago. Using Sarah's misinformation, they lured enemy forces away from the central spire, creating a window of opportunity. Weapons were checked, supplies packed, and strategies rehearsed until everyone knew their role perfectly. On the eve of the attack, Daniel stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. Below him, the streets were eerily quiet, the usual patrols absent due to the diversion. He thought about Emma, about how far they'd come since her death. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about freedom, about proving that humanity could rise above its chains. As dawn broke, the rebels moved into position, ready to strike. The battle ahead would be fierce, but Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, he knew they were fighting for something greater than themselves. For the first time in years, the future didn't seem so bleak. The attack on the Krylos stronghold began at dawn. The rebels moved swiftly through the shadows, their footsteps silent against the cold pavement. Daniel led the infiltration team, his heart pounding but his mind clear. He had spent days memorizing every detail of the plan, and now it was time to put it into action. Behind him, the others followed closely, their faces tense with determination. As they approached the towering spire that served as the Krylos command center, Daniel signaled for the distraction team to move into position. Their job was to create chaos near the perimeter, drawing the attention of the guards. Explosions erupted in the distance, bright flashes lighting up the sky. The sound echoed through the streets, loud enough to wake the entire city. Alarms blared, and Krylos soldiers rushed toward the commotion, leaving the main entrance less guarded than usual. "This is our chance," Daniel whispered, motioning for his team to advance. They slipped through the gates, sticking to the shadows as they made their way inside. The interior of the spire was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one lined with glowing panels and humming machinery. The air smelled metallic, and the faint buzz of energy filled the space. Daniel's team split up, each member heading to their assigned location. His task was to disable the central control system, a massive console deep within the building. If they succeeded, it would cripple the Krylos' ability to coordinate their forces across the city. But getting there wouldn't be easy. As he turned a corner, Daniel froze. Ahead of him stood two Krylos soldiers, their exoskeletons gleaming under the dim lights. One of them clicked sharply, its head tilting as if sensing his presence. Daniel held his breath, gripping his weapon tightly. Before the creatures could react, he fired, the blast striking one soldier squarely in the chest. It collapsed with a screech, alerting the second soldier, who lunged forward. The fight was quick but brutal. Daniel dodged the creature's claws, firing again and again until it fell to the ground. Panting, he glanced around to make sure no reinforcements were coming. Then he pressed on, adrenaline pushing him forward. Reaching the control room, Daniel found Alex already there, working frantically to override the system. "How's it going?" Daniel asked, keeping watch at the door. "Almost done," Alex replied, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "Just give me a minute." But time was something they didn't have. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing louder by the second. "They're coming," Daniel shouted, raising his rifle. Alex cursed under his breath, but worked faster. Finally, the console emitted a low hum, and the lights flickered. "Got it," he yelled, jumping to his feet. "Let's go," Daniel ordered, leading the way back toward the exit. The halls were filling with Krylos soldiers, their glowing eyes scanning for intruders. Gunfire erupted as the rebels fought their way out, the noise deafening. Daniel and Alex stayed close, covering each other as they pushed forward. Outside, the scene was chaotic. The distraction team had drawn most of the Krylos forces away, but stragglers remained, determined to stop the rebels. Rachel's voice crackled over the communicator. "Fall back to the extraction point. We've got what we came for." Daniel spotted her near a crumbling wall, directing survivors to safety. Together, they retreated into the ruins of old Chicago, disappearing into the labyrinth of broken buildings. Behind them, the spire's systems sputtered and failed, plunging parts of the city into darkness. Back at the hideout, the rebels celebrated their victory, though it came at a cost. Several members had been injured, and one had been captured during the retreat. Despite this, morale remained high. For the first time, the Krylos looked vulnerable, their iron grip slipping. As Daniel sat alone later that night, exhaustion finally catching up to him, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. They had struck a major blow against their oppressors, but the war was far from over. Still, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that humanity could reclaim its freedom. Emma's memory burned brightly in his mind, fueling his resolve. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. The victory at the Krylos stronghold sent shockwaves through New Chicago. For the first time, the alien empire showed signs of weakness. Their once impenetrable defenses had been breached, and their control over the city was beginning to crack. The humans who lived in fear for so long now dared to dream of freedom. Whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire, reaching even the darkest corners of the slums. But Daniel knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Krylos weren't defeated. They were wounded, and a wounded enemy was often the most dangerous. He spent hours poring over maps and planning their next move, knowing that the rebels needed to strike again before the Krylos could regroup. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he pushed through it, driven by the memory of Emma and the countless others who had suffered under Krylos rule. Rachel noticed his relentless pace and pulled him aside one evening. "You can't keep going like this," she said firmly. If you burn out, we lose more than just a leader. We lose hope. Daniel shook his head, his voice low but resolute. I can't stop. Not when we're so close. You don't have to do this alone, Rachel reminded him. We're all in this together. Trust us to carry some of the weight. Her words struck a chord, and for the first time in days, Daniel allowed himself a brief rest. But as he lay in the dim light of the hideout, his mind raced with thoughts of what came next. They had crippled the Krylos Central Command, but the real test would come when they faced General Vrax, the creature responsible for ordering Emma's death. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Intelligence gathered by Sarah, still working to redeem herself, revealed that Vrax would be inspecting the newly fortified outpost on the outskirts of the city. It was a risky target, heavily guarded and far from their usual operations, but Daniel saw it as a chance to settle the score. He presented the plan to Rachel and the others, who agreed it was worth the risk. On the night of the mission, the air was thick with tension. The rebels moved silently through the ruins, avoiding patrols and staying hidden in the shadows. When they reached the outpost, Daniel signaled for the team to split up. One group created a diversion near the front gates, drawing the attention of the guards. Meanwhile, Daniel led a smaller team toward the rear entrance, where Vrax was rumored to be stationed. Inside, the corridors were eerily quiet, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Daniel's heart pounded as they approached a large chamber at the center of the building. Through the doorway, he spotted Vrax standing beside a glowing console, its massive form towering over the room. The general's exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights, and its glowing eyes scanned the area with cold precision. Daniel raised his weapon, his hand steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. This was the moment he had waited for, the chance to confront the creature that had destroyed his life. But before he could act, Vrax turned suddenly, sensing their presence. Its mandibles clicked sharply, and it barked orders to nearby soldiers. The battle erupted instantly. Blasts of energy lit up the room as the rebels opened fire, forcing the Krylos soldiers back. Daniel focused solely on Vrax, dodging the creature's attacks while firing shot after shot. The general's armor absorbed most of the blasts, but Daniel's aim grew sharper with each attempt. Finally, a well-placed shot disabled one of Vrax's limbs, sending it stumbling to the ground. Seizing the moment, Daniel rushed forward, closing the distance between them. He fired again, targeting the joints of Vrax's exoskeleton until the creature was immobilized. Standing over the fallen general, Daniel felt a surge of triumph, but also an emptiness he couldn't ignore. Killing Vrax wouldn't bring Emma back. Still, justice had been served. As the rebels retreated into the night, explosions rocked the outpost behind them. Back at the hideout, cheers erupted among the group, but Daniel remained quiet. The fight wasn't over yet. The Krylos would retaliate, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for now, they had struck a blow that echoed across the city and beyond. The aftermath of the attack on the Krylos outpost rippled through New Chicago like a tidal wave. News of General Vrax's defeat spread quickly, carried by whispers in the streets and graffiti scrawled on crumbling walls. For the first time in decades, the humans saw the Krylos not as untouchable rulers but as vulnerable enemies. Hope, once a fragile flicker, now burned brightly in the hearts of the oppressed. But the cost of victory was high. Several rebels had been injured during the mission, and 2 had lost their lives. Their sacrifice weighed heavily on Daniel, who spent hours sitting alone in the workshop where he used to tinker with machines. He stared at Emma's toy robot, its rusted surface catching the dim light. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. The pain of loss was still fresh, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it fueled his determination to see the fight through to the end. Rachel approached him one evening, her expression soft but resolute. "We need you," she said simply. "The people are looking to you for guidance. You've become a symbol of hope." Daniel shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a leader. I'm just a man trying to make things right." That's exactly why they trust you, Rachel replied. You're one of them. You've suffered what they've suffered, and you're still standing. Her words stayed with him long after she left. Slowly, Daniel began to step into the role others expected of him. He visited neighborhoods across the city, speaking to groups of rebels and ordinary citizens alike. He told them about Emma, about the prophecy, and about the importance of unity in the face of oppression. His message was simple. Together, they could reclaim their freedom. Meanwhile, the Krylos struggled to maintain control. Without Vrax's leadership, their forces became disjointed and chaotic. Patrols grew less frequent, and their once intimidating presence began to wane. The humans seized the opportunity, launching smaller attacks to weaken their grip even further. Factories that had once produced weapons for the Krylos were repurposed to supply the rebellion. Gardens sprouted in abandoned lots, providing food for those who dared to dream of a better future. One day, Rachel called a meeting to discuss the next phase of their plan. We've weakened them enough, she said, spreading a map across the table. It's time to take back New Chicago, for good. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, but Daniel remained silent, studying the map. He knew the final battle would be the hardest. The Krylos wouldn't surrender without a fight, and many lives would be lost before it was over. Still, he nodded in agreement. We'll need everyone, he said finally. Every fighter, every family, every person willing to stand up. This isn't just our fight, it's humanity's. Preparations began immediately. Weapons were distributed, barricades were built, and strategies were rehearsed until everyone knew their role. Messages of defiance appeared on every street corner, urging people to rise up. The city buzzed with anticipation, a mix of fear and excitement hanging in the air. When the day of the uprising arrived, the streets filled with humans determined to reclaim their home. Armed with stolen weapons and makeshift tools, they marched toward the towering spires that had loomed over them for so long. The Krylos fought back fiercely, but their numbers were dwindling and their resolve was shaken. By nightfall, the battle had turned in favor of the humans. Fires burned in the distance, lighting up the sky as the Krylos strongholds fell one by one. In the heart of the city, Daniel stood atop the central spire, looking out over the chaos below. Tears streamed down his face as he thought of Emma and all those who had given their lives for this moment. Behind him, Rachel approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's done, she said softly. We won. Daniel nodded, his voice trembling. Not just for us, for everyone. As dawn broke over New Chicago, the surviving humans gathered in the streets, cheering and embracing one another. The Krylos' reign of terror was over, and a new chapter was beginning. Though the scars of the past would never fully heal, hope had taken root, and it would grow stronger with each passing day. Months passed since the fall of the Krylos, and New Chicago began to transform. The dark spires that once loomed over the city were torn down, their twisted metal repurposed into tools and materials for rebuilding. In their place, humans constructed new homes, shops, and community centers. Streets that had been cracked and littered with debris were cleared and repaired, bringing life back to neighborhoods long abandoned. For the first time in years, laughter echoed through the air, replacing the oppressive silence that had ruled under the Krylos. Daniel spent his days helping with the reconstruction effort. He worked alongside others, using his skills as a mechanic to fix broken machines and build new ones. Though he found satisfaction in the work, there were moments when grief still overwhelmed him. Late at night, he would sit alone in the workshop, holding Emma's toy robot and letting the memories wash over him. But even in those quiet moments, he felt a sense of peace. Her death had not been in vain. It had sparked something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Rachel often joined him during these quiet times, offering words of comfort and reminding him of how much they had achieved together. You've given people hope, she said one evening as they stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. Below them, children played in the streets while adults worked to rebuild their lives. That's something no one can take away. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I just wish she could see it," he murmured, clutching the toy tightly. She deserved to grow up in a world like this. She helped create it, Rachel replied gently. "Never forget that." As the weeks turned into months, memorials began to appear across the city. Statues and plaques honored those who had lost their lives fighting against the Krylos. One such memorial was dedicated to Emma Carter, a small girl whose bravery had inspired an entire rebellion. It stood in the heart of the city, surrounded by flowers and candles left by grateful citizens. On the day of its unveiling, Daniel addressed a crowd gathered to pay their respects. "This isn't just about remembering the past," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It's about building the future where no child has to live in fear, where everyone has a chance to dream and grow and live without looking over their shoulder." His words resonated deeply with the crowd, many of whom wiped away tears as they applauded. After the ceremony, people approached him to share their stories, how the rebellion had changed their lives, how they had found courage they didn't know they had. Each story reminded Daniel that the fight had been worth it, even if it came at a great cost. The transformation of New Chicago spread beyond its borders, inspiring other regions to rise up against the remnants of the Krylos Empire. News of the rebellion's success traveled far and wide, carried by messengers and broadcasts from makeshift communication towers. Slowly but surely, humanity began to reclaim its freedom, piece by piece. One evening, as Daniel walked through the newly planted gardens in the center of the city, he paused to look up at the stars. A single streak of light shot across the sky, bright and fleeting. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe it was Emma, watching over them and smiling. "Thank you," he whispered, closing his eyes. When he opened them again, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was still so much work to be done, not just in New Chicago, but across the planet. But for the first time in years, the future felt bright. Together, humanity stepped into a new dawn, united and unyielding. They had faced their darkest hour and emerged stronger because of it. And though challenges lay ahead, they faced them with hope, knowing that even in the face of despair, light could prevail.